Hi everybody, Clay with Clayborne LSAT here to talk to you today about logic games timing, a phrase logic games and another word timing that individually and together can strike terror in the heart of the LSAT student, but they need not with enough practice and with a good guide. So we're going to talk about some strategies for timing on the logic game sections today, but I want to preface what I'm going to talk about with an exhortation to you to first off be patient with yourself. Logic games, because of the timing challenge involved, are often what I like to call a lagging indicator when it comes to the LSAT. Although they're very teachable and the strategies for them can be very black and white, more so than the other sections, it takes a while to kind of metabolize those strategies and really make them your own and develop the right habits to finish the logic game section in 35 minutes. So let's talk about some frameworks you can use for the timing in particular to approach the logic game section. Those frameworks are going to differ somewhat based on the goal that you have in mind. So let's start out with a goal of finishing 3 of the 4 logic games. Now this may be your final goal. You may not have a goal of acing the logic game section. You may be happy with getting 16 or 17 right out of 23. That may fit the profile of the score, the LSAT score that you're looking for. If you're trying to finish 3 logic games, I'd like to suggest a framework of 9, 11, 13. That leaves 2 minutes left over as kind of a buffer to be added somewhere, but 9 minutes, 11 minutes, 13 minutes. Keep in mind, these timing rubrics are very general. You're never going to exactly hit 9 minutes, then 11, then 13. And the logic games vary quite a bit. However, it's a good opening rubric to keep in mind, 9, 11, 13, to get to the first 3 games. That 9 minutes for the first one is about the average time that it takes to do a logic game if you're breaking it down over 4. If you get a little under 9 minutes on the first one, that banks a little time for the next 2. But what I'm trying to do here is give you some memorable timing strategies that can be easy to put into practice because they aren't that hard to track. So 9 minutes, then 11, then 13, a good place to begin. Now, if your goal is to get to 3 games, but that's kind of an intermediate goal, your ultimate goal is to get to all 4, to get close to acing the logic game section, then we'll want to move on from there. But let me point out that can be a very helpful way to see the 9, 11, 13, to see it as an intermediate goal and just say, hey, I'm going to try to get to 3 games consistently, then I'm going to move on from there. When you're ready to move on, the next goal or framework is 7, 9, 11. 7 minutes for the first, then 9 minutes, then 11 minutes. All right, so the 7 minutes is it's a minute 45 seconds under the average time, again, that it would take you to do all 4 logic games. 8 minutes 45 seconds per logic game is the 35 minutes divided by 4. Most students will find that with enough practice, the simple sequencing or simple grouping games, and by simple I mean there's typically no other funny business going on. You're either simply putting them in order, putting them in groups, sorting them into groups, and there are one-to-one variables or players. That is, every variable or player is involved just one time and gets put in one time. When they're fairly simple and you find and attack that game first, most students will find that they can get to it in 7 minutes. And notice here that you do need to find the simple games and attack those first. They aren't necessarily the first game, although it's true that there typically is a fairly easy game among the first 2 games. Logic games don't necessarily go in order from easier to harder. So you need to find the straightforward sequencing, usually first off, and also look for simple kind of grouping, sorting type games. 7, 9, 11 for the first 3 games leaves you 8 minutes for the last game. That won't be enough to finish the last game, but it likely will be enough to consistently get 2 or 3 or 4 questions on that last game correct. And that will be kind of an intermediate step, as I mentioned, sort of a second intermediate step on the way to really getting to the place where you can get to the last game. Now, students often ask me, what is your strategy for those crazy hard logic games that can be somewhat unpredictable in their appearance? Well, the number one strategy for dealing with a hard logic game is to give yourself as much time as possible. That's the single best thing you can do. Hence, let's talk about our last rubric. We've had 9, 11, 13, 7, 9, 11. You're going to want to eventually get in the realm of 5, 7, 9. 5 minutes for the first, 7 minutes for the second, 9 minutes for the third. That is a real hustle to get to that place. And even expert games players often struggle to get all the way there, but it's a worthy target. It leaves you with approximately 14 minutes for the last game. And that's often what will be required, particularly in a section where the hardest game, whether it's actually the last one listed or not, is considerably harder than the other three. So keeping in mind that these are very general targets and you won't be hitting 5, 7, 9 exactly, if you can even get in that neighborhood of 21 minutes or so to do the first 3 games, however that breaks down, you'll be in great shape to approach the last game with time to really wrestle with what it's presenting before you, to tease out some possibilities, and to have enough kind of research to excel on the game as you go in. So to review, 9, 11, 13 to get to 3 games. As you move toward approaching the 4th game, 7, 9, 11. And then as you're really trying to get to all the games consistently, 5, 7, 9. Last thing I want to say here, and this is kind of advanced logic game strategies for those who really want to challenge themselves to ace the logic game section. If you've gotten to a place where at least one time you have aced a logic game section in 35 minutes, it's a good idea to begin to actually give yourself less than 35 minutes to do logic games practice sections. Give yourself 34 minutes. And then once you're comfortable with that, then 33. You might move it all the way down to 30 as you drop 1 minute at a time. The goal is that by the time you get to test day, that 35 minutes, instead of feeling really cramped, actually feels quite expansive. That there's really time for you to address all the games. So that's kind of a fun, challenging, a little bit crazy kind of American Ninja Warrior strategy that you can practice with the logic games. Thank you for tuning in to this Clayborne LSAT video on logic games timing. We'll be back soon with more great content on logic games and on the LSAT in general. We'll talk to you soon.